Hi. So I'm here to tell you about a number of different things that we've been working on recently, including some things that are happening live today as we have a Neuron challenge for the 2 days of the Games for Challenge conference as well. Just as a general background, I'm a director of Center for Game Science at the University of Washington. And all the work that I'll be showing you is done by the great people at the center, as well as neuroscience support by Allen Institute for Brain Science. And just as some background as what we've done in the past is, how many of you have heard of Folded? Okay, I don't need to, okay, at least for this audience, I don't need to do very much. So we did this almost 12 years ago. I'll just give you some of the most interesting things that I have found over 5 years of analyzing 8 years of data. The key thing, if you look at the best performing people in that space, is that almost none of them had any experience about biochemistry or proteomics at all. In fact, 3/4 of them had one basic chemistry class or less. And that, to me, that changed my entire research career, because I realized, hey, if we can actually do that, we can create a completely different pathway towards achieving any kind of expertise. And I've been kind of doing that ever since. Folded, of course, has now published 4 papers. There's actually a 5th one just accepted, so a 5th Nature paper. And just as a general question, once we accomplished this, I was like, well, why can't we just do this for education at large? Why can't we just do this at K-12? So we started posing a very, very crazy problem. We said, what if we can have kids solve these kinds of equations for X, which is roughly 8th grade material. And what if we can do that across the entire K-12 spectrum, including elementary school? And what if we can do it after just an hour and a half of active play by the entire classroom? And it turns out we actually tested this, not just in Washington State, where we run a number of these challenges, but we also tested it in the whole country of Norway, Uruguay, and Minnesota. And across all of these populations, what we have found is that for any classroom that has participated for an hour and a half or more, so any classroom in any one of those states, 96% of those kids reached mastery, as defined by those solving those equations that I just showed you. So that's the amount that's possible if you look at the entire ecosystem, not just as kids playing a game, but consider the teachers and how classroom is working together and how that's working together at scale for the entire population. So more recently, what we're doing is trying to do the same thing for college readiness. So this means adult population, kids out of high school who really want to place into college classes, but they can't. And so we've actually created a whole new platform that's inspired from stuff that we've learned on games, but it's really just a product that just tries to get as many kids to master everything that they need to know to be able to take college classes. And just an example of what just happened a few months ago, we had a community college student who we gave a paper test at the beginning. They scored 0. They couldn't solve any of these things. 19 minutes on this platform that's really tried to specialize uniquely to them and engage them and make them believe that they can actually do this. After 19 minutes, they're scoring 100 on that same test. So I'm really excited about that. It's not the topic of this presentation, but if anybody's interested in talking to me about this, I'd be more than happy to. The key thing that we've tried more recently is, how can we make an impact on neuroscience? And of course, when people from Allen Institute approached me originally with this, I said, well, yeah, neuroscience, that's great, but Eyewire is doing a really great job. Well, I don't necessarily need to do another neuroscience game. But then they persisted, and then pointed out these specific differences. Namely, Eyewire is primarily focusing on retina neurons, and what we really would like to do is address general brain neurons, not just in mouse, but in humans. Eyewire focuses on only one type of data, electron microscopy, but there's a whole bunch of different types of data that can reconstruct the entire neurons that are that require completely different treatment. So light microscopy is something that Mozak is focusing now, but it can focus on a number of other different sources. Eyewire has a really fine resolution. It's as fine of a resolution as we can get. Mozak tries to have things at lower resolution, but at much larger scale. So for example, instead of having a small part of a neuron reconstructed, we want to basically have coverage up to 10,000 times larger than what Eyewire is trying to do. So for example, for any of you who've played Eyewire, there's a way you kind of work on this cube, and within that cube you have the reconstruction. So let me just give you a sense. So this is a kind of volume that is worked on in Mozak. If we look at the entire retina data that Eyewire hopes to present for the next number of years, it fits into this space right here. Okay, so it's a much more detailed but much smaller region. So, and if we look at the actual amount of work for one of those cubes, well, it's kind of this size, only it's actually small. If I made it small enough to actually beat the scale, you wouldn't be able to see anything. But the key interesting thing is that even though that kind of data, detailed data, is extremely important and relevant, but there's also need for looking at things at much larger scale. And that's, once I heard that, I was kind of convinced, okay, we should actually do something in neuroscience, or at least try to. Our goal is basically to figure out how to get high-quality neuron reconstructions, full neurons. Some of them can be extremely large, and how we can develop novices into experts such that they're able to reconstruct at the same pace and quality as experts. And as a side note, we said, what if we can actually accelerate the whole neuroscience by 100 times? Because really the amount of data that scientists have generated is sort of increasing exponentially. The speed at which we can analyze this data is sort of increasing linearly at best. So we're constantly further and further behind from where the science really needs to be. So we created Mozak. I want to tell you about 3 key innovations that I'm really excited about that I hope a number of different games can actually deploy. First is real-time expert-to-player expertise transfer. So what I mean by that is that as people are working, experts in real time provide feedback on exactly the specific things that people are doing in the volume. So you have this sort of like not dialogue through forum, but dialogue through people actually doing work and getting sort of mass-scale apprentice-style feedback from world-class experts on exactly what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, such that the learning and the expertise is transferred through each one of those exchanges. And that, to me, is the most powerful thing. But because if you think about it, if I had to take the neuroscience books and condense them in some kind of progression of levels for people to learn, it's a really, really hard task. For full that, it took us 3 or 4 years to get something, and I still am not very happy with it. Here, it's kind of can always lie. If there's something new that neuroscience has discovered, they can immediately convey that to the entire population. And so in that sense, there's less of a boundary between experts or game-created experts. It's all the same thing, and knowledge can go at blazing real-time speeds from one to another. The other thing that's really new is that when you look at the very complex system of people and computers and experts, many things, just like in any game design, needs to be changed to adjust it. And as people become more experts, things need to be changed still further. So the question is, how can we automatically adjust the game such that it produces the best possible outcomes? So basically, the game itself is not the same. It changes itself based on how people are doing, what the experts are providing, what the automating methods are doing. And so with every new challenge, the game is actually different, presenting different kind of structures to people. And then finally, it's this co-evolution of automated methods and humans. If you think about sort of neurons, there's about 1 billion neurons out there, actually more than billions. If we think about how in the world can we reconstruct all of them, if somehow we could capture them, it sounds pretty hopeless. However, if you think about it from the perspective of automated methods can do something, but they're not doing so well now. But if they can be trained by people to become better, then together people and computer can actually reach the ultimate holy grail of reconstructing all the data that's currently available. All right, so let me just give you a sense of what is behind the scenes on Mozak. So we have these automated methods reconstructing neurons, which then are run by part of Mozak that figures out, okay, what is the set of things that you guys agree on? And then based on that, human groups are working with automated tools to improve those processes, which are then automatically in real time computed about, okay, what do all the people agree on and disagree on, and then provide that information real time back to people such that they can improve their outcomes. And then finally, the key thing here is that this human expert feedback, which is basically, as we speak now, is happening every 15 minutes or so during the challenge that we're posing. So basically, people can do stuff and in very short period of time get the world-class experts comment on exactly what they've done. That does incredible amount of stuff, not just from the perspective of expertise acquisition, but from the general engagement. Because if you feel like you're rubbing shoulders with an expert and they're telling you, hey, you're doing this part really well, it changes how you perceive yourself and how you see yourself as part of the scientific process. So I just want to give you a little bit more insight into this emergent knowledge. So the key thing that was problematic for Folded and pretty much all open-ended science endeavors is that, in general game, I can just give you a score, right? So if the score is something that you want and you know the student needs to, or player needs to achieve, that's easy. But for any scientific problem, you don't know what the ultimate score is, right? It's an unknown. If it was known, it wouldn't be a scientific problem. So the question is, how in that particular environment are you able to provide real-time feedback that's really necessary for people to excel? And as I already mentioned, sort of their expert feedback ended up being sort of one of the really interesting ways to achieve that. But there are other things as well. So for example, over time, there's basically an analysis of commonality between what kind of feedback experts provide to people, which then leads to emergent curriculum. It's basically items of wisdom, knowledge that are done extracted. Videos are created by experts showing those things, and then there are just-in-time inserted videos in the volume of neurons for people who make mistakes of that type. So you kind of have this curriculum that sort of emerges itself based on what the scientists figure out are important things about what they're doing and what they're not. Because I don't know if this has been my experience for working on 3 or 4 different domains here. Most scientists really understand a lot of things implicitly, but when it comes to actually explaining it in a way in which it can be actually a curriculum, it's very, very hard to do, especially for cutting-edge research. And a final thing that's interesting is that, obviously, if you think about solving hundreds of neurons at the same time with neuroscientists providing feedback every 15 minutes, you can see how that can start to not scale very well, right? So the aspect of the thing that we're changing here is that you're not going to be a neuroscientist expert in all the things that they know, but you could be an expert on a particular skill. And if the neuroscientist recognizes that you're doing something really well or you're recognizing errors in other people, you're deputized or you're ranked up for that specific skill. So all of a sudden you can actually provide direct feedback just like an expert on that particular domain. And so as your knowledge increases, you have knowledge of greater amount of skills, and so you're closer and closer to the real expert. And to me, what's really exciting is that I've seen some of the labs now realizing that these people are faster and better than full-time people that they're potentially have working in their labs for them. So they're saying, hey, can we just hire these people full-time to work on this for us? Because we don't want people to work on all neurons. We want them to work on our lab neurons. So obviously, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. But the key thing for me that's exciting is that there is sort of a novel path to a career acquisition by showing that people really have the skill that's undisputably better than or on par with the best people out there. I can show you some of these emergent curricula here. So these are snippets of knowledge distilled by neuroscientists. We actually give them credit in each one of those videos that are contextually introduced.
One thing that's really helpful to us scientists.
Okay, we'll take the video out. But they're contextually introduced for every particular issue or realization that that players need to have. So for example, this one has a key distinction between axons and dendrites, which is sort of a key structural aspect of, oh, these are playing a little slow. So Alice is a scientist from Allen Institute for Brain Science, and she's talking about the key difference between dendrites and axons, which are much thinner and need to be processed or analyzed in a very different way. Oftentimes, novices are not even able to sort of pay attention to a lot of the axon structure. So we now have up to 10 or so of these key wisdom nuggets that are now available for people to immediately learn, rather than having people have to provide, experts needing to provide that information. So Mozak has been out for about a little bit more than a year. We've had 66 different countries playing. It's actually been in New York Times recently with these specific outcomes. So first and most exciting thing is that the entire process at which Allen Institute for Brain Science was reconstructing neurons has been estimated to be sped up by 3.6 times. So whatever they were doing, now it's almost 4 times faster. That was very exciting to me, and obviously for scientists as well. But there are other key things that are really interesting that Mozak was able to do. So let me give you an example for one. So this is sped up version of an expert working on a portion of a neuron. What's interesting is that they were using sort of state-of-the-art tools, and over time they switched from state-of-the-art tools to novice tools in Mozak because they realized they could be faster with Mozak tools than the state-of-the-art tools. That was a very exciting milestone for us because we figured out we didn't design it really for experts, but when you design it to be easiest thing to do for everybody, it becomes sort of a better solution for everybody. Here's perhaps an even bigger outcome, is that a lot of times we pose neurons that we had information from experts already created in the past. And then we compared what the people are able to do versus experts. And in some cases, you see that, so for example, the Mozak is green and red is the scientist. And you see that there's some regions that are only green and not red, meaning that there are parts of neurons on this gold standard that scientists have created that were imperfect, and that Mozak was able to sort of improve over what was sort of the de facto gold standard for the science. That was also very exciting to me because it meant that they were approaching the sort of quality of work that is necessary for scientific advancement. The other key unique thing that has happened is that when you see publications in Nature around a lot of these neuron reconstructions, it's always the case that one person somewhere has reconstructed that neuron. And of course, you can imagine how many sort of robustness and sort of quality issues may emerge from only one person doing that edit. Here, in Mozak, you see here, basically we have confirmation from 4, 5, possibly 10 people independently confirming a particular structure. So our certainty that neuron actually really is what we've created there is much higher than having only one person being able to do it. And that is very, very important for science because you don't want sort of wrong conclusions to be derived from data that is imperfect. That's actually sets science backwards rather than pushing it forward. So I'm really excited that science now can actually deal with and have reconstructions of that particular type. The thing that I want to mention from past to current now is that this morning we started the Neuron Challenge to see how many neurons we can reconstruct in full in just 2 days. And this is the first time that we've ever tried this thing. I don't think we've ever reconstructed one neuron in a day, but I think during these 2 days it's possible. I was transfixed the entire morning looking at huge number of people start to do this, and some of the neurons are already, it looked like 80–90% done halfway through. So I think we will not go to this web page because either this network is slow or our servers are in trouble because a lot of people are playing one of those two things. But feel free to let people know about the challenge. I'm really excited about I'm really excited about seeing what outcomes we'll produce, and I think we'll announce some outcomes at the end of this conference as well. Perhaps the most exciting thing I want to tell you about is what is in the future. So Mozak right now is doing reconstruction of neurons, but the way that I thought about this thing is that games should not just try to pick one little tiny sliver of science and try to address it. Why don't we just span the game across the entire scientific process? And so if we look at sort of a set of things that scientists are doing, there are many different places where neuroscience can actually play a significant role. So first, one of the holy grails of neuroscience is to figure out sort of what's the periodic table of neurons. What is the space of all possible neurons and how they're similar and dissimilar? It's actually quite surprising how relatively crude this structure of classification is right now. So for example, you can see, well, here some of them are a little bit more spiny than others, etc. But what we really want to do is look at all things that we end up reconstructing and seeing which part of one neuron is very similar to some other part of other neurons, such that we can really understand the connection between shape and form of what these neurons are doing. So that's going to be the next in the franchise of Mozak, which is Mozak Classify. Then if you look further, scientists are actually starting to be able to sort of listen to the signals from specific neurons. So here you see a probe on the soma of this neuron. What this actually produces is a set of sort of firings of that particular neuron. And if you sort of look at the firings of many different neurons or same neuron over multiple amounts of time, you have this electrophysiology data that you want to really understand. This is how neurons communicate. This is how intelligence emerges. So how can we understand from shape and structure of a neuron to what signals they're sending, what is the actual relationship? That's going to be the Neuron Mozak EFIS project that we're going to be starting. And then finally, if you think about looking at it from a single neuron to now start to talk about the entire connectome. So think about all the neurons together, how they can be reconstructed, how can we understand their connections as well as their signals between each other. That's sort of the ultimate goal of understanding the connectome, the entirety of the neural system together. So as the data and the data capture mechanisms for capturing connectome mature, Mozak will be just in time providing support for doing the reconstructions of those things. More immediately, we're actually looking at taking a number of different sources from many different research labs and then actually processing that data for multiple purposes, ranging from education to improving machine learning algorithms that are doing this automatically, to creating new catalogs, etc. So I'm really excited about sort of, at least for this particular goal of reconstruction, that Mozak can actually serve as sort of a nexus point for what we can do in neuroscience. And then lastly, I want to point out one thing that goes beyond neuroscience. So what I'm really excited about to research, from the research perspective, is that we're getting closer to thinking about games as a new scientific pipeline. And what I mean by that is not just let's just turn one part of the game science into games, but more about the following. So if you think about what science really needs today, it needs a lot of computational efforts to process the immense amount of data that we can have. It needs people, and almost always in the beginning, these computer methods are not so great. For example, in neuroscience, they produce about 20% of fully complete neuron. People in Mozak community are now at 80 to 90%. But they can be fast. People, no matter how many we have, they're still not going to be as fast as computers. So the key question is, how can computers learn for the key things that people are doing, then get better at that? Once they get better at that, people use those algorithms as tools. And then people switch their expertise to other areas that computers are bad at. So you can sort of imagine this coevolution of algorithms taking over stuff that becomes boring and menial for people, and people always being on the cutting edge of the latest and greatest stuff that computers still haven't figured out. And so in that sort of communication together, we can sort of reach this sort of S-scale effect that we're looking for. Finally, the other thing that I'm really excited about is this sort of transfer of scientific knowledge from experts to humans. And that's, in some sense, this is what the entire educational system is supposed to do. But we can actually embed that in this entire environment without having to write textbooks, without having to go to 4 years of college, some postdoc time, it's a PhD and then a postdoc, and then finally you get to do something. What we can do this in much faster ways by creating immediate feedback from top-level expertise to people, and just letting people reach their potential that they may not even know that they possess. So with that particular point, I'll thank you. I can take some questions, I think.
So, Zoran,
yeah.
David Lawson with PBS Kids.
Yeah, hi.
Love your work. Obviously, you run the gamut between from health and professional development all the way down to kids. Are there any lessons that you're learning from your neuroscience work that you're looking at applying to the early childhood space?
Yeah. Well, I should mention that we actually have a collaboration with PBS Kids. I mean, it was outside of the scope of this talk, we're doing a number of different games that automatically adjust to every individual for scientific inquiry. And the key thing that we're leveraging here in Mozak, that also we're leveraging in PBS Kids, is this adaptation and specialization for every unique learner. And then also incentive structure for mindset change. So the idea is that we don't reward just the accomplishment, we reward productive struggle. And that's very important for young kids, but it turns out it's really important in the Mozak state when they start from not knowing anything. How do they realize that they're actually contributing right away and they can continue? So both those things end up spanning the spectrum of both pre-K to second grade kids, which is PBS focus, to sort of anybody in the world who wants to contribute to neuroscience.